privileged to introduce to you our speaker this afternoon, and for the weekend she has been my roommate at my house in Crafton Heights, and really have enjoyed her visit here. But Greer is a systematic theologian. She's been a lecturer. She's been a professor at Regis College. We share a common charism. She was formerly a sister of St. Joseph of Madai congregation. She has also embraced the Benedictine spirituality, and she's just a wonderful woman of prayer. I first met Greer and had suggested her as one of our speakers at Call to Action a couple years ago in Albuquerque. And what I was impressed by is she has been someone who's worked inside the church. And as we have talked over this weekend, she has really challenged some of us that have met with her that in order to transform our church, we have to work from the inside. And so this is our hope for this afternoon. I know that we're all angry in some ways. We are grieving and we're frustrated, but we need to stay together and support each other in hope, and I believe that Greer will give us that sense of how we can bond together and accomplish that. So I give you Greer Gordon.
Well, thank you, Sister Barbara. Some would say I'm a church insider. I've been a diocesan director in, I think, 4 dioceses. I've worked for 2 cardinals and 5 bishops, and I'm a black woman and I'm still in the church. I'm a former religious for a lot of reasons. Was taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph after graduate school at Notre Dame. I entered the community, felt very deeply called to contemplative life, and left for a monastery of Benedictines. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where I belong, but God seemed to have a change of plan when a bishop was sent by a cardinal to ask me to leave my monastery to come out and continue to work in the church, because there were so few women, trained as I am. At that time, I was one of only 2 philosophical theologians in the Roman Catholic Church that were women in America, in the U.S., Sean Copeland and myself. And the fact that I was a black woman who at that point had spent a number of years in the service of the church on the staff of the bishops, they asked me if I would come out to address some problems, and with that I wound up in Boston for a number of years and spent 25 years total on the Eastern Seaboard. So I'll give you a little bit of a shorthand because I don't want to waste a lot of time on my life history, but just to give you a little background on who I am. And as I shared with Sister Barbara earlier today, I'm an extreme intuitive. In fact, when I was a little kid, my dad used to laugh and say to me as he would embrace me, he'd say, "Little girl, you're like a duck. You wake up in a new world every morning." Because all things were new and hopeful and gracious. And what I've learned as an intuitive who was called to do into the most intuitive form of theology, philosophical theology, systematics, doctrine, is that I could have lived in rarefied air all of my life. And that as a black woman in America, having grown up during the years in which I did, in the 60s, late 60s, 70s, really were my years in college, that it was not acceptable for me to reside in the rarefied air of upper echelon academia. And it was for that reason that I really embraced the apostolate before going into full-time faculty positions. And that's why I've worked from coast to coast. I've worked inner city ghetto, both in New Orleans, Washington, and Boston. I'm now called once again into the ghetto. I'm now the coordinating director of the Healthy Communities Project for the 100 Black Men of Metro Baton Rouge. Very interesting that a benevolent black organization is engaging in the form of evangelization I have felt called to do in my own home diocese. And so with that, I am no longer teaching, but I am in fact engaging in leading an initiative that hopefully will bring some radical change to the to the black community in North Baton Rouge. It's an area known for very dense poverty, working class poor. So it gives you a little sense of myself. So far as my working for the bishops, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but we certainly have to deal with them because of the fact of the sexual abuse crisis. And I want to start by telling a story of my bringing the name of a priest into my accountability meeting with Cardinal Law. I was not with Cardinal Law during the time that the controversy of the sexual abuse in Boston broke open. I'd been recruited from my monastery. What I didn't know was to go to Boston to be part of the team that would help desegregate South Boston. And a lot of things happened when I was there. Monsignor Murphy, who's now the Bishop of Rockville Center, was the close ally with whom I worked on that project for the Cardinal. I opened the first office for Black Catholics in Boston. And I could go on and on with all of that. But in the process of working in the inner city, I spent a lot of time going in and out of our city parishes trying to find out what our needs were, because my mandate from the Cardinal was that nothing was to close on my watch. And he was very specific with me in a private meeting. Your mandate is no black parish in this archdiocese is to close on your watch. And I said to him, so who else knows that? And he said, you do. Oh, really cool. So in other words, you're on your own, but see that it doesn't happen. And he said, because if the paperwork comes to me and it is in order, I will close it. Okay, cool. So I spent a lot of time working very closely, developing relationships with the pastors, with their staffs, proposing various ways in which to transform ministry in the inner city. I had both, by that time, worked primarily in evangelization and catechetics, and so it was truly a challenge to begin to move that forward. However, I was in a parish, and I can actually call the name of the priest as well as the parish, and I saw something that even to this moment I have nightmares about. And I cannot tell you exactly what I saw, but it is a recollection. And I often, sometimes, especially when all of the things that have transpired and have come forward regarding sexual abuse in the church, I have had this reoccurring dream where I'm back in that very parish, in that very scenario, and I see an interaction between a priest and a young black adolescent. When I went into my accountability meeting following that session at the parish, it was with Bishop Robert Banks as well as with Cardinal Law himself, and it was just the three of us in the room, and I presented to the Cardinal at the close of my accountability for my office, finances, the whole yada yada, whatever. I said to him that I had a couple of concerns, and I presented to him the names of two priests. One was a priest who, in my opinion, was running a plantation and it was time for him to move on. And I stated it just that bluntly, that the times for overlords in inner city back parishes had passed. And that although he was a lovely man and his own brother was a bishop and a former auxiliary of that diocese, he perhaps would be best in some other pastoral setting, respectfully suggested. And the way I approached it was to say to the Cardinal that the priest had publicly announced that he kept begging the Cardinal to move him. And it was the truth. I was sitting in his church that very Sunday. And so at that point, the Cardinal turns to the bishop and said, good, get his resignation, move him. He's done. And I thought, cool. The second priest, I said to him, this is rather troublesome and problematic. And all I can tell you is that I saw something that I think is distressing and disturbing, and I'm presenting it to you because you may need to check this out. And I told him of the interaction I saw with the pastor of a parish, inner city parish, and a young black adolescent male who was about 15, maybe 16. My own younger brother is gay male, and what I saw was an affective encounter that gave me great pause and great concern. No touching incident, but it was the manner, the approach, and everything else about the engagement and the relationship. And I'll put it to you this way. When a man puts his hand in the small of the back of a woman, you know two things about those people. One is that they are intimately involved with one another, and the man regards the woman as certainly his sexual companion at that point in time. No one touches a woman in that fashion unless that is, generally speaking, who they are and the relationship they're in. And those of you all who are married women and married men, think about it. This is part of the affective relationship, that's sort of the entitlement, okay? When we see those, the equivalent of those kind of interactions between adults, especially those of us who've had some encounters where we're aware of the potential for sexual abuse, which I was at that time, it's a red flag. And I presented it as delicately as I could. I had even written out my remarks as I presented to the cardinal and the bishop. Immediately, the bishop and the cardinal began to have an intense conversation about this priest. And the bishop kept saying, see, it's time for that guy to go. We've got to deal with him. And it just went on, and I had no idea what they were talking about. It was as if I wasn't in the room. This very heated, intense discussion of yes, it's time. So 2 priests were gone from the inner city inside 48 hours. I didn't really know the significance of the second priest until I saw the movie Spotlight. The movie Spotlight came out, with Tom Broom. Some of you may know Dr. Tom Broom, Boston College. Tom Broom and I have known each other for many, many years. His wife, Colleen, is a theologian as well. I've lectured at Boston College for her, da-da-da-da-da. And so I've been out of Boston for a number of years, and I saw Tom at the Los Angeles Religious Ed Congress where we were both speakers. And he said to me, pulled me on the side, he said, Greer, have you seen Spotlight? No, I haven't seen it. He said, no, you've got to see this. And I said, I don't think I can cope with it. At this point, I don't think I can handle this. He said, no, you have to see it. And he turned to me and he said he was with, he and Ron Rolheiser, Father Rolheiser were talking. And they both turned to me and they said, you're going to know people. You are really going to know people. And I thought, oh, this is scary. And he said, no, seriously, you don't have a choice not to see this movie. When I returned to Boston, I rented the movie. And because I'm going deaf, I tend to watch things with headphones and I run things back and I do the whole bit. Well, I did watch the movie and I was stunned. I knew everybody.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't that I didn't know somebody, I knew everyone. And I know a lot of people criticize the filmmakers saying that they had attacked the church. Well, I'll tell you, they were really very good to the church. Because Peter Connolly is not a layman. Peter Connolly is the former head of the communications secretary for the Archdiocese. He's the man who coached me and taught me how to talk to the press. How to give them everything and give them absolutely nothing that they can call. And I can still run it in 37 seconds. I mean, he truly put me through it. So there were presentations of individuals in that film that were treated very graciously. Among them was Father Peter Connolly, who should have been. Frankly, he's a very good man. I assume he's still alive. However, there were people who were notably absent from the movie. One of whom, frankly, was Bishop Banks, who was in fact the vicar for the administration and my boss, and probably had more to do with presbyteral movements than the cardinal did. However, in all of those engagements, and as you go through the movie, there is a point where the reporter gets his hand on a list of abusers, perpetrators. And people have said, well, the list was absolutely real. I stop-framed the movie to go through the list. I knew a number of the men on that list, but what was really substantive for me was the priest that I had presented to the cardinal was on the list. And the date and the year of his removal from ministry was within days of my report to the bishop of what I saw. I didn't see any sexual engagement. I simply let them know that I saw something that intuitively, not intellectually, distressed me about that relationship. That particular priest, as I understand it, and certainly from Spotlight as it was presented, I later spoke with a close higher up in the Archdiocese who informed me that he was immediately sent for psychiatric services and frankly has been there for life. I didn't know anything about sexual abuse in my city. But I was an adult working in the church who observed something, who saw something, and I said something. So I want to put that out here for us first off. You got to say something. The fact of the matter is, as a laywoman working in the church, one of the first rules I learned was you never say anything about priest to the boss. You never ask the bishop to move anyone, because that's a good way for you to be out of a job. So that's just factual information. And yet in 2 instances, probably because I had been trained by some very clever and long-term experienced women religious, I knew how to present those men without asking them to do anything with them. Are you with me right now?
Yeah.
So part of what we have to do, and I'm very grateful to the sisters who formed me over the years of my growing in diocesan administration to learn how to do that. For that reason, evidently, a major pedophile was removed by the Archdiocese of Boston from ministry. So that's one. I want to back up before that to why I had a sense of it. When I was in undergraduate school at the University of Dallas, I studied systematic theology. I went there to study chemistry, biochemistry, and genetics. Wound up going into systematic theology. Interesting tale of how that changed. But I, at that time, coming out of high school, had been trained in working with deaf children, not having a clue that I would myself go deaf, and I'll talk about that later. And in the process, I had been recruited by a very wealthy laywoman who was personally financing what we now know as the commencement of the deaf apostolate in the Diocese of Dallas. And there were several of us, a number of the members of the School Sisters of Notre Dame who had a mother house and then a bishop there connected to the university, and myself. They recruited me as a laywoman out of the university. Were kind of shipped out to a parish where we worked with these young deaf children, all of whom were non-congenitally deaf except for one family. Well, at some point on or about my junior year of college, we were joined by a seminarian who was an older guy. And he was, I mean, you know, when you're 19 and, you know, some 35-year-old comes to join you and he's a seminarian, we were kind of like, gosh, the old guy showed up. And I'd love to be the young guy who's 35. But in the process, this fella kind of came in. He was a speech pathologist, audiologist, who was going through the undergraduate school seminary, Holy Trinity Seminary. And immediately he wanted to work with the children one-on-one, which we often did in a very large room, but he felt the need, he kept insisting that he needed to take the children outside, out in the hallway, out in another classroom, out into a stairwell, and I absolutely would not allow it. And I was not in charge. In fact, I was the junior among all of them, and I was not one of the young sisters. And I would go to war almost every Sunday with the sister who was in charge, who was the temporary professor, that this was unacceptable. All of our training and how this process had worked for 2 years was we just didn't do that. And so with that, this guy reported me to the university and ultimately to the bishop, Bishop Cheney, who said, you know, that's too bad, but maybe this isn't a good place for the seminarian. And he was removed from working with us, said let the nuns and the lay women continue with that, and we continued on our merry way with our apostolate. Years later, I received a call from the Diocese of Baton Rouge, which is my home, from my best friend who was informing me of the fact. She said, do you remember that guy that you ran into in the university? I actually have photographs with him. I said, you remember you had a lot of trouble with him around the kids and just wanted to take them off and you wouldn't let it happen? I said, yeah, you know, what was that about? And she said, well, he's probably has a lifetime penitentiary sentence here in Louisiana as a pedophile. His name was Lane Fontenot. Wow. Many years later, I was in the Diocese of Dallas, giving a talk for their Religious Ed Congress, and a young man came up to me. He was deaf. And he indicated to me that he was the new director of the Deaf Apostolate, and told me that he knew who I was and that I was the catechist who had formed him for his first communion, which made me feel really old. And he said to me publicly, in the presence of his bishop, with a translator, "I want to thank you. Because of you, my father died knowing that his son was never molested by Lane Fatima. Because you fought him, you and you alone fought him, he never got to take me off, and he never got to molest me." I was a kid. I didn't know anything about sexual abuse, but my instinct said, this is how we do things, why do you need to change things? And no, you don't need to do this. And it was as I was reminded, it was always that same cute little boy who could not speak and who could not hear. Are you with me right now?
Yeah.
The most vulnerable of the vulnerable. When we look at sexual abuse, we have to be mindful that this is not about sex. And a lot of people think it's about sex, and I know you all have had a great deal of training and formation. But I just want to say, I am not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, I am not in any of those professions. I'm a catechist. But it's very important for us to remember, theology at its best was done by the true catechists, the catechetical schools, Alexandria. So when we begin to look at this issue, we have to reframe our thinking around it. We have to reframe the thinking of everyone else about it. Because I think there's a lot of falsehood still present, and this is why we cannot root it out and we cannot deal with it. There was no intention on the part of those men that I happened to see with those young boys to molest them because they were boys. It was because they were children who were vulnerable and available. Are you with me right now? I've met with a lot of psychologists and one major psychiatrist in Baton Rouge who kept hammering to me over and over again. He said, people are thinking about this all wrong. It's not about sexual orientation. They're not attracted to boys, they're not heterosexual or homosexual. They're child. And this is a mind-blowing thing that the church is not saying. Pedophiles' natural orientation is to children. That is what makes them beyond frightening. Their natural desire is to be with children. And it does not matter if the child is male or female, but that is a prepubescent child. Are you with me right now? So why do we have an overabundance of young men, males, who have come forward to say, to identify or start to identify themselves as having been molested in the church? Think about it. We didn't have little girls as altar servers. We only had young boys. The few young women, young girls that identified themselves publicly as having been molested thus far by priests, when you go through the list and read their accounts and their stories, almost each and every one of them identified the priest as having been close friends with their families. Are you with me right now? Yeah. The boys were picked up at the church, out of the school. They were available altar boys, present. Mom thought they needed a male presence and allowed Father such and such to pick them up and take them off and whatever, which made them available and accessible. So part of what we have to begin to do is to move the church away from this thought that, well, see, if we had married priests, we wouldn't have this issue. You know what? Many of those pedophiles are married. The large percentage of pedophiles are, in fact, married men. So marriage has nothing to do with the problem. A large percentage of those individuals are in heterosexual relationships, which means it has nothing to do with being homosexual. So part of our need right now as church is to reorient our thinking of who are these people and what are we looking at. So I want to back up for a minute and just say this. Part of the problem, in my opinion, is that we have been missing that critical piece. And I think a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists know this. Certainly they know it. They just haven't thought that they needed to teach us that, because I think they feel like we figured it out by now. So there's a category of people we are dealing with who were pedophiles. Their orientation was toward children, toward vulnerable children. And the more vulnerable and the more accessible the child, those were the careers and the places they went to in order to gain access. Are you with me? Yes. Access is the key strategic word. And so we have them in priesthood. But we also have them as physicians, and stories are coming forward. We have them as ministers across the church. And when I say church right now, I mean Christianity. So obviously there is some aberrant behavior in nature that has produced these individuals. I don't know if Sister Anna Policino is still alive. She is the founder of the House of Affirmation. But in the 1980s, when one of our diocesan directors of religious education was picked up for carnal knowledge of the child, it was decided by the national organization that all the directors had to go into immediate formation around this issue. And we were in Seattle, Washington in the middle 80s when Sister Dr. MD, PhD Anna Policino, a medical missionary sister, came in to speak to us. And she was no holds barred, and if you've ever met her, she's a very straight shooting, direct talking, at that point, middle-aged Italian woman. And part of what she said to us was that these people could never be cured and must be immediately removed from ministry. They cannot be sent away and changed. There's no circumstance under which they can ever be allowed to remain in any kind of active ministerial engagement in the church. Now that was, as I recall the date, on or about 1986. April of 86, which meant it was Easter week, which is the week that the National Conference of Directors meets. Okay? So how did we get from 1986, having this kind of knowledge and information, to 2019, and we're just starting to get grand jury reports? And we're just starting to hear the names of who these people were. And part of what has happened to us has been an unwillingness, and I do say an unwillingness, on the part of leadership to accept what they were being taught and told. There's a Father Carey, who's out of also the, I forget exactly his diocese in the state of Washington, who was also known for his very specific lectures and actually gave meetings to the bishops during the national conferences on this issue in the middle 80s. And frankly, in 1987 or thereabouts, might have been 86, November 86 bishops meeting, the bishops all agreed that every bishop would go home and inform their priest that if you're engaging in these behaviors, have these problems, you should come forward, because if anything happens, you are on your own legally and financially. And still, nothing happened. We started to move in a serious way around impeding the abuse of children, but we missed a whole other echelon of people. So let me pause for a minute and just give you what I would list as my analysis of the problem, of who we're dealing with. I think we have 7 different problems. We keep trying to morph it all together, and we can't get a grasp of it because all of us are trying to deal with 7 different issues simultaneously, and before we can grab one, the other one has already gotten away from us. rather than realizing we're going to have to divide up, split up, and have teams that are going to deal with different areas of this problem. Are you with me right now? So please pardon me as I lay this out. This is something I'm still working with. I did present this in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles around the 23rd of March when I was asked by the Office for Religious Education and the Los Angeles Religious Ed Congress staff, with permission of their Archbishop, to open up the conversation in the diocese around sexual abuse. And they seem to think this made sense. So if I could share this with you, please bear with me, and I'll qualify it when we do the Q&A. So we have one group of people that we know about. They are the true, genuine pedophiles. They are the people who, for whatever reason, seek out and want to find children. The more vulnerable the child, the more ease of access, those are the kids they will find. Are you with me right now? So if they have cerebral palsy, if they have absent parents, you have just a variety of issues, but they're going for the vulnerability. We have another group of individuals who are, in my opinion, possibly, well, I'm not going to grace them with that. And I'm going to split these people in two groups. We have another group of people who decided that for whatever reason, although they agreed to live celibately, they didn't have to. You know, it's understood in my becoming a priest, but I'm not called to be celibate. And I'm just not going to live that way. So if I happen to have a lover on the side, that's okay. I'll just not give scandal. And so we have, what was it they called him, Father Lover, Father somebody, hit all the magazines down in Miami as he was photographed on a beach with his girlfriend. And he later left, only because it became scandalous. He left and became an Anglican clergyman and married. It's interesting to me that we don't talk too much about those guys, but we have them. They didn't intend to be celibate. They have never ceased to be sexually active. They have been heterosexually, sexually active throughout the time they've been in priesthood. We have their counterpart in the homosexual community, pardon me for using that term, in the gay community, as often those men refer to themselves. You know, and those men are the same as their heterosexual counterpart over here. They entered the priesthood never intending to be celibate, but they did feel called to presbyteral ministry, and frankly, they're probably good at it. But they have lovers and companions. Most of the time, they're savvy enough to make sure that there are other priests. Sometimes they mess up, meet someone in a bar, and there you have it. Okay? And I just want to say parenthetically, when I was young in Washington, I can remember the director of the Office for Black Catholics pulling me into her office because there were only about 3 of us on the property who were black people. And I was only about 29 years old. And she said, look, I know you're a baby, but I've got to update you before you get to your office because all hell is about to break open. And she said to me, Father so-and-so, who was a senior pastor, black pastor, in inner city black parish, had been photographed dancing naked on the table in a gay bar. And of course, all of my I'm scandalized kicked in. And she said, shake it off, shake it off. You know, you've got to listen to me. And so she went through this whole thing of the damage control the Archdiocese was engaging in order for this not to become a scandal in the church. Are you with me right now? Yes. Senior pastor, black male, inner city parish, naked, tabletop, and gay bar. And the Washington Post was going to publish it on the front page of the paper, as in the photo. So the whole day, everyone was in a skirmish. Those of us who were black were trying to figure out how to deal with our parishes, how to deal with that parish. And ultimately, The Archbishop knew somebody who knew somebody who wrote somebody a favor, who knew somebody, and got it pulled from the paper entirely. And that pastor continued to be in his parish. And the joke of the day among the priests on my floor, of which all of them were, save 2 of us, when is he going to learn you do that kind of thing in the Archdiocese of Baltimore? This is down the road and around the corner. In other words, open fact. So all the things we're hearing in the papers, there's a culture of gay culture. There is a culture, I would say not a gay culture, but there was a culture among certain groups of clergy that it was okay if you wanted to have a girlfriend on the side. We have at least one bishop who was in Los Angeles who had 2 children. Right? A very celebrated Mexican-American archbishop who left many years ago because his lady friend was discovered. A very dear archbishop whom I truly loved and greatly respected, who was black, went the same way, and that lady went on Oprah Winfrey. So all this talk about gay culture, and we have to talk about sexual culture. So along the way, we have had priests who have not wanted to abide by the policy, by the posture, by the understanding of their ordination, meaning you be celibate. And that group of people, on any given day, it's 50-50. Now, I'll talk about the guys who truly live celibately later. I'm coming to you guys, excuse me. And they have a right to feel hopeless, too. They have a right to really feel denigrated. Did the bishops know about these priests who were sexually active? I don't know, you have to ask the guys. You have to ask what the brothers did. Okay? The brothers did. So, 3 groups. True pedophiles, those who chose to be sexually active and not celibate, of which some are gay, some are heterosexual. 3 groups, 3 problems. 3 problems that we have to address, okay? Because those problems, if you're gay and sexually active, or gay and entering priesthood, is a different issue than if you're heterosexual and sexually active and entering priesthood. But the ultimate problem is we need to deal with you at the level of, are you mature enough to take on this issue? Those are the people who have a maturity problem. But I would say basically, it's not a maturity issue. It's an issue of telling the truth and being who you are or not. Okay? 4th group. The 4th group also, I would say, splits into 2. But it tends to be more predominant in the one area than the other. And those are people who are inclined toward, well, they simply are people who are predators. The other 2 groups of people I don't believe were predators. I think they were just people who wanted to be sexually active. They wanted to have their cake and ice cream all together at one time. Want to be priests and not be celibate. This 4th group of people, I would say, are predatory in nature. Their intention is to seduce individuals who are vulnerable, and they go after it. You will oftentimes find them in campus ministry. Sadly, I met up with one of those people when I used to go to LSU, who was a predatory priest who was constantly trying to bed down young girls in a variety of ways. We also have predatory priests who are trying to bed down young men. Whether those young men oftentimes are on the cusp of coming out as gay, they're oftentimes in college, and with that they become kind of in this man-boy sort of relationship, and we have heard of them greatly, and we have a number of them. Are you with me right now? And I'm sorry to go through this so slow. Is this making sense? Yeah. Okay. So we have the predators, and they are true predators. They are there specifically because they want to go after vulnerable people of the sexual-oriented type that they are seeking. And they are usually dealing with late adolescents. If they're smart, they're making sure that the young person is over the age of 18. The sixth group. So I would break that group into two groups, right? Variation on that is when we have predatory leadership. And this is the problem we had with an individual whom I greatly appreciate being referred to as Mr. McCarrick. That when people say, well, the church isn't moving fast enough, well, you know what, we defrocked the frigging cardinal. And people get upset with Francis. Well, guess what? I'm so glad that he had the testicular fortitude to stand up and do it, as any Jesuit provincial would. Are you with me right now? And for all the criticisms of who knew and whatever, the fact of the matter is no one had taken action, and he did. McCarrick situation is particularly heinous. And it's heinous because he used the power of his office in order to seek out, find, and molest males. He was an obvious homosexual. I won't grace him by calling him gay. Okay? Who also spoke out often against homosexuality. We had the same thing in the Diocese of Baton Rouge with a bishop named Sullivan. They had to remove his name from a high school. One of the most conservative bishops in the history of the Diocese of Baton Rouge. Law and order, everything for Jesus. Make sure you dress just so, and everything must be according to, if at all possible, Tridentan alignment. And here you are seducing seminarians. And not just seducing them, actually molesting them. That gives us a completely different category. Are you with me?
Yes.
Because that's a category that's about using your office for a specific purpose of seeking out and finding sexual prey. Under federal law, we call that sexual harassment. Roman Catholic Church has done nothing to educate any of its teams, its staffs, about sexual harassment and what that looks like. That was the sexual harassment of an underling. Whether that underling is a seminarian or whether it's your secretary is the same thing. But when it happens to be one who took a claim, and I don't know about the rest of you all, I'm sure for others, but I remember the first time I was present for the ordination of bishop, the elevation of bishop. And I thought, what a scary thought, is when the statement is made that you now stand in the line of the apostles. How dare you stand in the line of the apostles and do such things? How dare you make such a claim that you even have the right to stand in that line? I think canonically we would say, obviously, they were not canonically appropriate for the position. Are you with me right now? There's a major problem, and so people keep lumping everything together. No, this guy is different. McCarrick is different from Marino, different from Ramirez, and different from the bishop whose name I can't remember in LA. Those people got swept up, caught up in relationships, and didn't care about their celibacy. These guys are out there looking, setting up, cultivating, and bring about a situation in which they can have advantage over those they are attracted to. Are you with me right now? So when we look at how do we get our hands on this problem, that's why we have to strip out the problems. We have to do it in a systematic way. And the last problem we have are those members of leadership who knew, who were either duplicitous or complicitous. We're not really sure who they were in some instances. My greatest distress was that I had on many public occasions ask that we give the benefit of the doubt to people like Bernie Long. And then when I began to read and see and follow the line of thinking and the trials, only to realize that, frankly, there was a callous disregard for the fact that there were children and vulnerable people who were being molested. And that's a different problem. And that problem I'm going to start by talking about. Okay? So you with me right now? So we can't get a grip on it because we keep morphing it all together. The bishops can't get a grip on it because, frankly, they're still trying to figure out who they are. And part of the problem, and please pardon me as Father, let me know when I need to stop for Q&A, okay? Father John? Okay.
Am I allowed to?
I'm sorry?
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. Keep going. I can keep going, right? Yes, okay. When we hear, and Sister Barbara and I were talking, she said, you know, if people say my bishop doesn't have any empathy, that's a problem. So we've got to start with who's in leadership now. And they're not going to like what I have to say at all. Because all those psychologicals that I was given to become Sister of St. Joseph, we need to brush those boogers off and start passing them out in chantries. And I'm not joking. No. The USCCB should have a day when every bishop in this nation is tested. We want to know who you are. Yes, it's privacy, but the fact of the matter is we need to know if your head is on straight. We need to know if you are someone who is in fact a pedophile, or are you someone who is a predator and we just haven't found it out yet. Are you with me right now? I have a cousin who moved to a lockdown gated community called English Turn in New Orleans. I arrived lovely, you know, $1 million home. Every door was unlocked, and I walked in. And she said, oh, I kept locking every door I came to. And she said, we don't have to lock the door. You know, we're a gated community. We have guards at the outside. I said, you know, that's great, but you don't know who's inside the gate. And she suddenly got frightened because she's a chief of pediatric oncology. And she thought, oh, my God, I have my children vulnerable. I said, yeah, think about it. You all just moved here. You don't know who's here already. We don't know who's here already. Are you with me right now? So part of our addressing this problem, part of our bishops gaining credibility, and we are going to have to be very careful as to who we select to engage in this. But we need a team of psychiatrists to test our bishops. And I'm not saying this because I'm looking at Father Vince, but I think Duquesne could offer some leadership in that. And I do mean that. I mean, I know well the work of Father Adrian Van Calm, which we talked about at dinner last evening, who, you know, I grew up reading his spirituality and the psychological basis for that. So part of it, please do not think that I'm saying this lightly or loosely. Part of what will gain us credibility is for our bishops to be tested. And we can't do that, but they need to design, with the best of our psychiatrists and psychologists, a process for analyzing our bishops like unto what we put others through as they enter into priesthood, into religious life. Are you with me right now? What will that do? It's going to give them back some level of credibility. It will also tell us something else that I really want us to look for. When people say things like, my bishop has no empathy, part of what I have to ask is that, is he not schooled or capable of letting you know that he's empathizing with you, or is he incapable of empathy? And that's a difference. Because if he's incapable of empathy, then we have to get him out of office quickly. Okay? What do I mean by that? At the Nuremberg trials, the chief psychologist, when he published his findings, he said, you know, as I dealt with these Nazis, couldn't figure out what I was dealing with. kept encountering this over and over again with them. And he said, what I have arrived at is that evil was what I was looking at. I was dealing with evil. And he said, how did I know I was dealing with evil? He said, because evil is the absence of empathy. That's really very important for us. We cannot have leadership who are devoid of empathy. Why? Because people who are absolutely incapable of being empathetic are sociopaths. We need to make sure we don't have any in leadership in the church. We have to start with leadership in this case. We've already run through all the seminarians and all that. We still have pedophiles. That's a whole other conversation. But part of what we want to look at now with our leadership is how do they regain credibility? And part of their credibility is they're being tested, are being certain and being assured, and if they are not at a level where they should be, then Rome will perhaps have to find a nice monastery for them somewhere in Europe. I think the Carthusians have an open spot out in LA. Big so. But I'm not saying that lightly. I'm saying that in genuine truth. So our bishops need credibility. And they're going to have to do something radical to regain that, and that is one of the ways I see that they will regain that. What will that do for us as church? It will give us hope. Why? Because we'll know right off the bat, we're not dealing with people anymore who are going to let this fly or tell us they're going to handle it, but in point of fact, they are not. Next, when we look at these individuals that we do have, those who are still sexually active, I mean, the brothers need to ask each other, okay, who are you? You all know who they are anyway. Are you in or are you out? Several years ago, I was asked to join a panel of theologians, among them Father Jim Martin and Dr. Tom Bedoin at the University of Santa Clara, to talk about gay priests in the church. We had the permission, frankly, of Pope John Paul II to host this dialogue. And it was, I think there were 2,000 people in the room. We were told that there were 3 Vatican observers. And in the course of that conversation, we really got into the nitty-gritty of the fact that we have some men who are homosexual. Why wouldn't we? We've always had men who are homosexual. Kind of like said we don't have any homosexual religious brothers or religious women. Of course we do. I mean, that's part of the population reality. Is that some reason they should not serve in ministry? I don't personally find that to be the case. It's all about what needs to be set in place for you to be supported in living your commitment. The Sisters of the Social Service have been taking out gay women for decades. They've never had any episodes, they don't have any issues, because part of their formation process is to work with these women around issues of sexuality and what's the difference and how love is manifest in religious life. That's the formation question. And what we need right now is to have more women religious, and I do want to say healthy women religious, who are helping to form men in priesthood around issues of sexuality. You've been doing it successfully for decades, haven't you, ladies? And I'm not being condescending, I'm just being honest, as a woman who went through religious life, who lived celibately, who was formed at the hands of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Benin. So that when we look at these questions, what are you choosing? What are you about? Why are you here? Those of us who live and breathe out of a Benedictine mode of life, that's a foundational question from St. Benedict. Who are you and what are you about? We have to ask people that question. It's more than simply allowing people to go forward without it. So that's kind of the summation of what I have to say about where are we, what have we dealt with, what are we looking at with issues of sexuality in the church. A couple of fast comments, and then I'm going to open it up for your questions. We will never stop pedophilia. We have to be very honest and very frank about that. Only thing we can do is become hyper-vigilant about it. I was a 19-year-old wet-nosed baby, and I stopped a pedophile, and I didn't even know what he was. I didn't even know what homosexuality was, or heterosexuality for that matter. I didn't know my feet from my shoelaces. But I stopped something that I didn't know I stopped, because my gut said, no, this is not right. What we need to do is unleash the guts of the church. We need to unleash the laity by educating them very rapidly, very quickly about issues of molestation and sexual abuse. More children are molested in their own beds in their father's house than they are by any priest or anyone outside their families. Are you with me right now? So we need to very quickly train parents. I know we have our sexual abuse prevention teams in parishes. That's fine. Let them continue their work. What we need is to train the real workforce. The real workforce is the catechetical workforce of the church. Every catechist in the church must have a component that trains them how to recognize and how to address sexual abuse. And they, in turn, need to train parents. What do I mean by that? You know, we do catechetical adult education hostage-taking all the time. Every time we get parents in a room, we have to give them skills, we have to give them information so that they become part of the workforce of recognizing, seeing, and responding to sexual abuse. Are you with me right now? Yeah. Which means, when we prepare you for baptism, one of the components, no, we're not going to bring in the sex abuse person. We're going to give you a little monograph that I gave to my sister and brother-in-law when they were married and had their first children. Little monograph, about 96 pages, called Betrayal of Innocence, B-E-T-R-A-Y-A-L of Innocence, by Susan Forward. Every parent should read it. They don't need any conversation. They need to simply discuss that together, because she does the work for us in saying how to see, how to recognize, and how to protect your children. Betrayal of Innocence by Susan Forward, like the book Forward. You can pick it up on the internet. It has been, she has expanded it now, it's probably about 120 pages. Should go into the hands of every parent. Every First Communion parent, one component should be, again, a refresher or reiteration on, we want to remind you that part of our bringing the children to be one with Christ is to also know that they come to Christ knowing that they are free and they are able to be themselves as children and as innocents. And with that, we want to share with you some insights of how to protect your children. My brother-in-law, as a result of that book, recognized one of his brothers as a pedophile. And in that family, they have addressed him and dealt with him. How many other families have people they just didn't know what was there and what's happening? We have a lot of women, a lot of us in this room who are survivors. We just never told anybody. There are a lot of us in this room who know people who are survivors. We just don't admit to it. And sadly, there are maybe, quite likely, at least one of us in this room who is in fact a predator and a pedophile. Where's the hope? I think there's a lot of hope. Here's the real hope we know now. The secret's out. The biggest thing that a pedophile wants is the secret. We don't keep secrets anymore. We don't let the bishop offer secrets anymore. So that the real hope is that the truth has opened. Someone said to me, you mean you're going to stay? Of course I'm going to stay. I went here, I've already been here through the lie. Whether I wanted it or not, I participated in the lie. I didn't know that my bishop was housing pedophiles or harboring them. So whether I like it or not, as a member of this faith community, that's my sin too. Why? Because we say we're all one in Christ. Their sin is my sin. As long as we allow them to continue to represent us as leadership, then we are one. We are one in that, and therefore, how do we change it? Well, I think part of the way we change it now is we have to educate ourselves and them. One comment to you. If you're a teacher in any school, you are a federally mandated reporter. I actually had to federally report one of my family members as a molester of his child. And he did everything he could to blackball me in every segment of my family. Because my thing was to respect the privacy of his daughter, who did not want it known that she had been molested by her father. And so I have stood in certain sectors of my family where I said, yeah, but you dealt with such and such. And I thought, why don't you ask him why I made that phone call? And so I deal with it. But the fact of the matter is, I don't care. Because when I stand before God, when that moment comes where I have to account for my life, and I'm asked about that child, I can say, I did the best I could, and on my watch, whatever happened ended. The most important thing for anyone who has been molested is when the psychologist gets to a point where they ask, and why did it end? And in the case of that young girl, she can say, I have a family member who stopped it, who stood up to him and ended it. So part of it is lots of us know those people. No bishops gave birth to any pedophiles. They came from us. They're our siblings. They're our cousins. They're our sisters. They're our brothers. We know those people. We saw them as the crazy cousin nobody wanted to be left alone with. They're the man or the woman that no one, you were warned not to be caught in the same room with them because they were always on the mate, and probably you would be finding yourself in a situation where you might be unwillingly sexually compromised. Are you with me right now? We know those people. In college, we made a point at the University of Dallas. We went to parties together, and so the drunken friend never got left behind. So why are we leaving people behind in the church? So part of our hope is to begin to stand up and take back our credibility as adults in the church. Our credibility is we know these things. We see these people. And so we can, in fact, alter the impact of what they are doing. We simply have to tell somebody. That's more than just about terrorism. I'm going to pause here for a minute and take your questions.